All right, good evening, 晚上好. So tonight we're in the book of Ecclesiastes. 今天晚上我们在传道书 and we're starting, this is the new book, and the reason why I chose this is because it's going to kind of piggyback off of the book of Proverbs. 然后呢，为什么我选择这本书开始学习的？因为我们也是在学习箴言书。And so the author is the same. 然后呢，写作的人是一样的。It's King Solomon 是Solomon 王。And this book is actually kind of it has wisdom in it, but it's more of like contemplating life. 然后这本书也有很多智慧的，但是也是比较思考生活的问题。And the sum of this book is that life is full of you could understand like trials, tribulations, and vanity. 然后呢，生活你可以就是这样的了解这本书的大概是什么意思？就是我们的生活有很多很多困难的问题，而且很多东西是可能没有那么大的意义。And what Solomon wants us to learn from this is that to pursue what is valuable in life and not what is a waste of time. 然后就是要追求什么东西是对你生活是最重要的，不要浪费你的时间。And this book is really to help us to think personally about our lives and every single action that we take in our life. Is it meaningful or is it a waste of time? 然后这本书是为了让我们自己思考自己的生活，是我每天的每一步，我是浪费我的生活，还是我是做了是最好的？ And so that is let's look at this. So the title is actually The Search for Meaning in the Shadows of Vanity. And that's what we're gonna focus on today. 然后今天晚上的主题是虚空的之中的意义的追寻。And so Solomon, let's look at verse 1, 第一节. So we're in chapter 1, Ecclesiastes, verses 1 through 4, we're going to look at tonight. 传道书第一章1到4节 says the search for meaning, 意义的追寻. The words of the teacher, son of David, king of Jerusalem, 传道者大卫王的儿子，在耶路撒冷做王的人的言语。So this is who? 这是谁？ This is King Solomon. 这是 Solomon 王。And so he doesn't come out and say this is King Solomon, but we know exactly who it is. One, by the style of his writing. 他没有说他是 Solomon 王，但是这里我们都知道是谁。他说是大卫王的儿子，而且我们可以看到他的语法，还有他的学的方法，都知道是 Solomon. And it says that from here it goes, verse 2, 第二节 it says, Vanity of vanities. 传道者说虚空的虚空 says the teacher. Utterly meaningless. Everything is vanity. 虚空的虚空的凡事都是虚空的. And so this, like, sometimes in this book, 有的时候在这本书 you get the impression that he's either kind of very pessimistic or almost like a kind of like depressed overview. 然后呢，我们在学这本书的时候，你可能感觉他的态度没有那么好，他可能比较他的看法可能有点不对。But actually what he wants us to do is he wants us to think about the pursuits in life that most people pursue after in this life are ultimately meaningless. There's ultimately not that big of a goal that most people chase after. We mostly pursue after things that are worthless. 然后呢，我们大部分的人都是追求的是就是没有什么大的意思，就是最后就是浪费的。And so he says that he goes vanity of vanity, like chasing after this, chasing after that is vanity. 就是追求这个，也是追求那个是虚空的。And so what is he getting at? Because he goes in here and he launches on a 12 chapter kind of like a rant. 然后他发了一共是12章，然后他就是在比较讨厌生活。And he makes it seem like as you're reading this that is the end of it all, is it worthless? Is our life, does it have ultimately no meaning? 然后呢你可能在思考，那我们的生活是没有什么意思吗？ And he goes on saying like every single person ultimately chases after things that are vain, that in the end it has no meaning because you're going to die and everything you accomplish in life you can't take it with you. 然后他说了，大部分的人他们都追求自己的目标，但是以后他们都要去世了。那去世之后也没有带他们的东西带走。And so, like for instance, like most people they chase after, they want to become super rich. Why do they want to become super rich? What is our motivation? Is it to buy bigger houses, more cars? Well, ultimately, he's saying that this is vanity because one day that person is going to die and they can't take those houses or cars with them. 然后他说，那很多人也可能以后成为非常有钱的人，为了什么？为了什么可能买更多的车、更大的房子等等。但是最后这个东西也不想带走。So then he's saying, he goes, if this is ultimately the meaning in life, what people pursue after, but if you can't take it with you, is it then worthless? Does it have a meaning? 然后呢，他说，如果你也没办法带走它的话，那还是有意思吗？或者就是没有什么意思。And so everything that he basically alludes to in this chapter, in this book, is he wants us to think about, to contemplate from our work, the activities, our relationships, our ambitions. Is it all meaningless? Is it all worthless? 那他也让我们思考，我们生活中的所有的东西就是工作，我们的关系，我们的抱负，还是虚空的吗？还是有意思？ And it's interesting because he takes a perspective of almost like, at times it almost comes off as he would be a person who is an unbeliever, but then he quickly shifts back to being a believer. So he sometimes takes a perspective on what the average person would think about, and takes a step back and says, okay, this person's pursuing after this person's pursuing after that, but ultimately they're kind of pursuing after the same thing. And for what? For why? Why? What's the point? To fill your own stomach, but then ultimately, what's the reason? What can you do once you leave this world? What can you take with you? 然后他说了，所有的人就是非基督徒、基督徒，他们都追求了差不多一样的东西，是为了什么？为了给你自己吃饱吗？但是这个是虚空的吗？还是有意思？而且你离开这个世界的时候，还有什么意思？And then he also goes on to later on say that every single action we take in life has a reaction. 然后他也说，我们在生活中的做什么行为的话，以后也有所有的行为都有自己的结果，或者自己的以后的回复。And he wants us to think about. 然后他让我们就思考了。Because he also goes on to say that a lot of young people, we don't think about that. 然后他也说了很多年轻的人，我们可能没有思考 ，and we just live from day to day. 然后呢，我们就是天天活着，想做什么就做什么。And he says that this is very, very foolish. 然后他说这个也是比较无知的，比较笨的。Why? Because ultimately it's going to, we will be judged for every single action. 因为以后所有的行为，上帝都会审判。And so, what does he mean by this? Vanity of vanities, or meaningless of meaningless? 那为什么他说是虚空的？ He goes, everything is vanity, everything is meaningless, everything in life. 然后他说，我们的生活中所有的东西就是虚空的。为什么？ What is he getting at? For example, think about these 5 questions. 你思考这5个问题。What are the primary pursuits or goals in your life? And do they bring lasting fulfillment or just temporary satisfaction? 你的生活中的主要追求或目标是什么？他们带来了持久的满足，还是仅仅是暂时的满足？ So think about that. Like every single person ultimately has some reason or something that they're pursuing after. 所有的人，他们都有自己的追求的东西。It might be something small, but ultimately everyone has something that they're going after. 可能比较少的，或者你觉得是没有那么大的意思，但是所有的人都有。For example, you could say, well, I just want to make enough money so that I can eat and be happy. 我就想赚钱是为了可以天天吃的 OK 了，吃饱了，然后让我开心的。But think about this. Or some people, they say, well, I don't really have any goals. I live from day to day, and what you do during the day, for example, a lot of people that have these type of goals, they will pursue, whether it's like a sport or they will pursue, filling their days with entertainment. But ultimately, even that has some type of mini goal inside. 然后他们都是可能追求运动、玩游戏或者看很多视频的东西，但是这个也是有小小的目标。For example, you start watching a show， 就比如你开始看一个电视剧。And you want to finish that. Well, that's kind of like a mini goal. 然后你想看完它，那就是小小的目标。And this is what he's saying. He goes, it doesn't matter what it is, or maybe it's work, 或者可能是工作。And you wanna get to a high position in your company. 然后你想在你的公司里，找到比较大的位置。Maybe you want to become a boss, 或者成老板。Or you want to start your own company, 或者成为还是开自己的公司。But he says ultimately in the end, this is also meaningless. 但是以后他说也是虚空的。Why? Because the rich and the poor, he says, die alike. 然后他说有钱的人有贫穷的人，以后他们都有一起去世了。And so he goes, what is the ultimate purpose? 那我们的生活是什么意义的？是什么意思？And he wants us, and he takes his perspective on bringing up all these different questions because he wants us to think about what is the purpose of my life. 然后他问了这么多问题，是因为他想我们思考自己的生活，我的生活有什么意思？ why do I exist? Why am I here? Why do I pursue after, relationships? Why do I want to get married? Or why do I want to start a family? Or why do I want this new job? Or why do I want to make a bunch of money? Like, why? What's the point? What's the point? He asks a ton of these type of questions. 然后他问了很多不同的问题，就是为什么我要结婚？为什么我要开公司？为什么我要赚钱？为什么我要吃饭？为什么我有这个目标还是那个目标？为什么？ He goes, because in the end, we pursue all these things, but ultimately, in the end, we're all going to die. 但是最后的结果是什么？我们都要去世了。So why? What's the point? Or is it all a waste of time? 那目的是什么？还是就是以后是没有什么意思，因为我们都要去世了。And the conclusion that he comes to, 然后他的结果是什么 is that it's actually all meaningless. 其实是都是虚空的，没有什么大的意思。And then he says later on, he says, but the one that pursues after God has a meaning. 但是谁是追求上帝的话，有意思，有大的意思。And so this is what he wants, and this is his ultimate goal in this book, is to have us to personally reflect upon our lives. Like, what is the meaning? Why am I here? 然后他向我们这本书就是思考，为什么我存在？为什么我在这里？ Another question, 第二个问题。Am I placing too much value on material possessions? This is something else that he brings up in this book. Achievements or status. And how do these things affect my sense of purpose? 我是否过于重视物质的财富、成就或地位？这些东西如何影响我的人生的意义感？ And so think about that. 我们想一想 In my life, in your life, do we place too much value on personal possessions? And I think at times all of us are get to this point at least some point in our time. Maybe we don't stay there that long, but I think all of us at some point or another we get to these places in life where we want to have more. But ultimately some of us will realize that hey, this doesn't really bring ultimate meaning, and we might even turn away from that or sell it all off. 然后呢，我自己发现了很多人，我也是之前，我们可能想买很多东西，但是我们以后就发现了这个东西也没有给我那么多的快乐，然后可能把这个东西卖掉。I remember a long time ago, I used to love buying a lot of video games. 我之前特别喜欢买很多游戏 ，and I would collect some. 然后我比较就是 collect 买很多一样的游戏 ，but after a while, I was just like, you know what, it gets boring. It loses its fun. 然后呢，以后我就觉得就是有点无聊的，我觉得没有那么大的意思。And then I just sold it off. 然后我就把它们卖掉。And I think a lot of people experience this in life, whether you're a Christian or not. 然后很多人就是可能也是遇到一样的问题，不管你是基督徒还是非基督徒。When we were really little in school, a lot of people used to collect like different types of sports cards, or whether they were like Marvel cards or whatever. Or they would collect, Pokemon cards. Like these type of things were very, very popular. 我小时候很多人可能就是买很多 like 卡片，就是运动卡片或者 like 应收的卡片还是like Pokemon 的卡片。But ultimately, and we do that because we want to collect them all. 然后我们这么做的话，因为我们想找到所有的。But later on, a lot of us just we lose interest. 但是以后我们都可能以后对它没有那么大的感兴趣。It's fun for a while, but then it leaves. 是可能短时间是给我们快乐，但是以后不会。And so he says that this also is meaningless. 然后他说这个也是虚空的。And so and then whether it's material possessions or it's even achievements, 是我们是买的东西还是也是或地位。And he says in the end, these are also meaningless. 以后这个也是虚空的。And it's a very interesting perspective to take on life. 然后我觉得是对生活比较有意思的看法。And so I remember the first time I read this book, I was like, wow, this guy is really, really almost depressing. 然后我第一次读这本书的时候，我觉得，哇，他的态度比较糟糕，比较没有那么好。我觉得你读完之后也可能没有那么开心。And he does that so that we personally reflect on our life and on our actions and on our motivations. 他这么写的是为了让我们自己思考自己的生活。思考自己的行为，思考自己的目的，或者我们追求什么。And because the thing is that whatever we do in life, 我们在生活做什么 what I do, what you do, ultimately, people have done it before us. 我做什么，你做什么，之前的人已经做过了。And so nothing is new, he says, under the sun. 然后他说在天堂上面没有什么东西是新的。That means what you do in life, whatever it is, your work, your ambitions, someone else has already done this before you. 然后呢，不管你的生活做什么，追求什么，你的工作、你的目的什么的，之前也有人已经做过了。And he goes, so what's the point? 所以他说，那你为什么你还做吗？ And so he's not saying that everything you do in life and your life itself is worthless. 然后他的意思不是生活的所有的东西是没有意思，你的生活也是没有意思，这不是他的意思。他的意思是 he wants us to think, why am I doing this? 他想我们思考为什么我做了。Why do I want to make a lot of money? Why do I want this new job? Why do I want to pursue these ambitions in life? 那为什么我要赚更多钱？为什么我要上班？为什么我的生活有这么多的目的 ？Why? 为什么 ？Number 3, 第三个 In what ways do I find myself striving for things that ultimately feel empty or unimportant? 在那些方面的我发现自己在追求那些最终的感觉空虚或不重要的事情。And so, is there anything in your life? Is there anything in your life that you are chasing after that or already have that in the end leave you feeling empty or leave you feeling like, well, you know what, I got all this, I got what I wanted, and it brought me pleasure for a little while, but in the end it didn't. In the end, I'm still back to where I started in terms of addressing my feelings or my needs or whatever. 然后呢，你追求已经拿到了，还是买什么东西，还是卖什么东西？以后你可能感觉我还是在我第一步，可能短时间给我快乐，但是我发现了以后，我还是感觉还是想要的，还是想别的东西，还现在没有给我那么多的满足。And so think about it, like in the end, did it still bring you lasting pleasure, or has that already gone? Has that already left? And if so, why? And so think about it, because I think all of us can look back in our lives and say, you know what, I bought this, and it brought me joy for a little while, and maybe I bought more, but in the end, I lost interest. It escaped me, or it left me. And it's like you go out and you buy tons of new clothes. For a while, you might be very, very excited. But in the end, it starts to lose value in your eyes. And at the end, you're just like, well, you know what? It's just like something else, everything else. 然后呢，就比如你买新的衣服的话，可能非常开心，很期待穿它。但是穿了几次之后，你觉得，没有那么大的意思，我还对它没有那么大的感兴趣，跟第一次不一样的。And so what we do, we buy more clothes. 所以我们做什么？我们买新的衣服。 and you keep buying，然后你继续买，and he would say that this is also vanity， 然后他说这个也是虚空的。when I was little， 我小时候 I remember especially when I was in middle school， 特别是初中的时候，when I was in middle school， it was very very important for guys to have like the new like the newest Jordans or whatever the newest like especially basketball shoes were. They were very very popular. 我在初中的时候买最新的打篮球的鞋子是非常非常有名的，特别是如果你是男生。And so everyone would always buy the New Year's the newest shoes, and they'd be like $150, $200, etc., $300. 然后可能那时候是150美元、200美元、300美元等等。And a lot of us, when I was really really little, I couldn't afford that. 然后我小时候我没这么多钱。But the students that did have these things were usually very popular. 但是谁有的话，平常很多人他的朋友们会比较多 ，and we call like the rich kids or whatever. 我们平常说就是比较有钱的孩子。And so and I remember there's some of the my friends would have like 30 plus pairs of shoes. 我有些的朋友们他们的鞋子是30多 ，and these are just like like the newest Jordans, the newest whatever it was, Adidas, Reebok, all of them. 然后可能是不同的牌子，但是他们都有。And but then what happens a couple years later? Do they still have those shoes? Most of them probably don't. They wear them for a year and they throw them away. 他们但是几年后还有这么鞋子吗？花这么多钱还有这个鞋子吗？可能不是，几年后就扔了。And so this is one of the things that he says that is it wise to pursue all these things? Is it wise to buy all these clothes, all these shoes? When in the end you're just going to end up throwing them away anyways. 然后他说还是智慧吗？你买这么多鞋子，这么多的衣服，还是智慧吗？因为以后都会扔了，对吧？ And so number 4, and so think about these things. 所以思考这个东西，第四节，number 4. How do I define meaning and success in my life? And are these definitions aligned with my spiritual values? 我如何定义生活中的意义和成功？这些定义是否与我的精神价值观相一致？ And so, from a Christian's perspective, 所以我们基督徒看法来说 everything that I do in life, 我在生活每次做东西的时候 that means like everything you do in life 就是你生活的是生活的所有的行为 does it align with what God would want you to do 是跟上帝对你的生活的意义一样的吗 or are there things that I've been pursuing recently that ultimately are not what God wants me to do 或者我最近是追求的东西是上帝还向我追求吗And I think that's a very, very good question. 然后我觉得这是非常好的问题，我们都要思考。And one of the things that, growing up in the church life, 然后我在教会中的生活长大了 a lot of Christians would have, especially when it came to like making money and being rich, a lot of Christians would have kind of like a bad perspective on that, on pursuing after a lot of money or being a rich Christian. They say like, well, you shouldn't pursue after money and this kind of stuff. 然后呢，我很多年我在教会里面长大了，然后很多基督徒我们可能对赚钱或者有钱的人可能觉得就是比较不好的。为什么？因为我们觉得，因为你赚了这么多钱是为了干嘛？因为以后你也不能带他去天堂。很多基督徒也是有这样的想法，我也是小时候也是这样的想法。A lot of us Christians, we have this idea that, well, if I make a lot of money, what's the point? Because ultimately I'm going to die and I can't take any of that with me. And then there's truth in that. 然后这个也是道理的，也有真理的。Because whatever you accumulate in life, you can't take any of it with you. Whether it's your clothes, your money, whatever, you can't take it with you. 所以你买了什么衣服，赚了什么多钱的话，也不能带走它。The people like whoever it was that was super rich before, they didn't take any of that with them. When King Solomon, when he's about to die, he was the richest king in the world at the time. He couldn't take any of that with him. 然后扫门王他准备去世的时候，他那时候就是世界上最有钱的王。 他所有的钱也没办法带走他。And so he's writing this book as an old man. 所以他在写这本书已经老人。It's like it's meaningless. 然后他说是虚空的。I have everything I wanted. 我什么都有。You know, and he had it said that he had over 1,000 wives. 他超过1000的like 老婆。And he had all the money he wanted. He had all the food he wanted. And everything was, it said that even in his kingdom during that time, that silver was worthless. 然后那时候他想吃什么都有什么，想买什么都有什么。然后他说那时候那个 silver 是什么？是橙子 ？silver 就是不是金色的是什么？银子，银子也是没有什么价格，没有人要的，因为那时候那个金子太多了。And so, you know, during this time in his kingdom, silver was pretty much worthless because there was so much of abundance of gold in Jerusalem. And so, like, and none of that, even with all that, he couldn't take any of it with him. 然后呢，有这么厉害的经济的话，但是什么东西也没办法带走。And so, one of the things that he wants to do is he wants us to think that, you know, from his perspective, he has everything. 所以对他来说，他什么东西都有。Whether it's food, it's money, it's clothing, it's shelter, it's material stuff, it's wisdom, he had it all. Women, he had it all. 所以不管是钱、是衣服的、吃的，或者什么东西、住的地方，有什么女生的美女或者智慧，他都有。And his ultimate conclusion, he says he sums up in one thing. 然后他最后的结果，他说了一句话，and he goes, ultimately, the meaning in life, he says, is summed up in one thing. 然后他说最后的结果是什么？ It's to fear God, 是敬畏耶和华。He goes, because ultimately anything else is worthless. 然后他说别的东西都是虚空的。And as a Christian, we should often take a step back and think, are the things in life that I'm pursuing after, are they meaningless, or is there a meaning to it? 然后呢，我们基督徒也有的时候需要停止自己的行为，思考我现在的行为是有意思吗？还是虚空的吗？然后这是非常好的想法，这是非常好的思考的。So how do I define meaning and success in my life? And are these things definitions aligned with my spiritual values? And are these definitions aligned with my spiritual values? 我如何定义生活中的意义和成功？这些定义的是否与我的精神价值观相一致？ Are they? 是吗？ And so that's something that I think about, and I think all of us should as well. You know, what am I doing like today? What am I doing this week? What am I doing this month? What am I doing this year? You know, what are my personal goals? And is that aligned with where I need to be spiritually? 然后呢，我今天做什么？我这周做什么？我这个月做什么？我今年做什么？就是跟我的属灵的目的有关系吗？ Number 5, 第5个。What steps can I take to shift my focus from the vanities of life to more meaningful, enduring pursuits that align with my faith and values? 我可以采取哪些步骤，将焦点从生活中的虚空转移到与我的信仰和价值观上一致的更有的意义，持久的追求的上。And so think about that. 所以想一想 ，Does it have meaning what you're pursuing after, or is it meaningless? 那你在追求什么东西？是虚空的吗？还是有意思？ And so that's what he wants us to think about. 所以他想我们思考这个东西 ，because he says that whatever it is, whoever it is， 然后他说不管是谁。Or whatever you're pursuing after, 或者你在追求什么 He goes, ultimately, someone has already done this before you. 他说，我跟你说了，不管你追求什么，还是想做什么，还是你目的是什么，以前已经有人做过了。And so he wants us to think about that. 所以他想我们思考。And he doesn't say in here that, you know, pursuing after like, whether it's marriage or having kids or starting a company or making money in and of itself is bad. He doesn't say that, but he wants us to think about what are my goals and is there value in it, or am I just wasting my time? 然后他没有说如果你想结婚了生孩子或者开公司还是赚钱还是做什么都是不好的，他没有这么说，但是他想我们做什么，他想我们思考我最近的目的是好的吗还是不好的，是浪费的还是不浪费的。And it's very, very good. And so he is writing this book at the end of his life, and he's saying like, look, I have pursued after everything. And he says most of the things that I pursued after are ultimately meaningless. 然后他说了，因为他现在是老人，他写这本书，然后他说我什么东西已经追求过了，然后他说很多东西是虚空的，然后他也想我们思考我现在的追求是不是虚空的，还是是意思的。And what he wants us to do is that whatever we pursue after, 然后他想我们追求什么东西 that all of it is in line with spiritual values, 然后都是关于我们的精神有关系，就是跟我们的属灵有关系。Because ultimately, when we die, we can't take our money with, we can't take our cars with, we can't take our clothes with. 因为我们离开这个世界的时候，我们的钱、我们的车、我们的东西、我们的衣服也没办法带走它。But what we do take with us is our spirits. 但是我们带走什么是我们自己的属灵。And so that's what he wants us to think about. 所以他想我们思考这个问题。Because you could have all the clothes you want. 因为你想买什么衣服都可以买完了。But ultimately you're going to realize that, I bought these clothes 2 weeks ago and I really, really like them. But after 2 weeks of wearing it, I think that, it's not that big of a deal. 然后我2周前买这新套衣服，我觉得非常非常好，舒服的，我特别喜欢。但是2周后，我觉得已经习惯了，对吧？ And so he would say like this is ultimately is vanity. 然后他说，其实我跟你说就是虚空的。And so this kind of perspective on life, 这样的对生活的看法 a lot of people say, well, it's kind of it's so what is the purpose of life? Are you saying that life is ultimately meaningless? 那他说，那生活的道理是什么？意义是什么？就是虚空的吗？还是有意思？ And he ultimately says that the sad reality, 然后他觉得是比较不好的结果 is that most people they pursue after vanity and then they die and that's it. 很多人他们追求是虚空的，以后就走了，然后他们没有什么意思。So what he wants to do, but he says that the ultimate goal in life is what? Is that if you have a fear of God and you have that always before you, that whatever you do in life, it'll ultimately line up and bring ultimate glory to God and meaning to your life. 然后他说，但是如果你敬畏上帝，不管你追求什么东西的话，如果你继续敬畏他的话，你追求什么东西以后没有什么虚空的，因为都可以一起合作的。最后的你的生活有非常大的结果子。And this is kind of like, and then when you read this book from the Old Testament, 所以你读这本书在旧约的时候 and you look at like what Jesus said in the New Testament, 然后你看到耶稣在新约说了 it makes a lot of sense. 你会非常了解 like in Matthew chapter 6, verses 19 through 21, 马太福音第6章19到21节 Jesus says, lay not up for yourselves treasures upon earth, where moth and rust do corrupt, and where thieves break in and steal. 耶稣说，不要为自己积攒财宝的在地上，地上有虫子咬，能受坏，也有刺猬的窟窿来偷，窟窿来偷是小偷来偷走它。And so Jesus wants us to think. 所以耶稣也想我们思考我们在这里做什么。Because you can buy the biggest house, you can buy all this stuff, but ultimately, that stuff you can't take it with you. 所以你在这里可以买最大的房子，买很多很多东西，但是你还要记住，你离开这个世界的时候，什么东西也没办法带走。But Jesus says,然后耶稣也说 but lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust doth corrupt, and where thieves do not break in and steal. 然后耶稣说，但是或者吃药，积攒财宝在天上，天上没有虫子药，不能受坏，也没有刺猬恐来偷。So in heaven, whatever you do here on earth for God, you'll be rewarded in heaven. 所以你在这里怎么做，什么东西是为了上帝的话，在天堂也有很多那个财宝。And in heaven, there's not going to be no one will come and steal it. 但是在天堂没有什么小偷。It's not gonna get old. It's not gonna break. 以后不会坏了。For example, like you buy a new computer, 就比如你买新的电脑的话，a year later it's already starting to break. 一年后已经开始坏了很多，对吧？I bought this new laptop a year ago. 我一年前，去年夏天我买这个电脑。And now the little thing, the cursor thing doesn't work. 现在那个中间的有那个盘子有点坏了。And so sooner or later I have to buy a new one. 以后我需要买新的。And so everything's like that. 所有的东西是这样子。Jesus says, but in heaven it's not like that. 但是在天堂也不是这样子。And so think about Solomon. 然后你思考 Solomon 王 He's writing this book, and he's saying like, I have everything I want. 然后他说，Solomon 王写这本书，他说我什么东西都有，我都有。he had 1,000 wives. 他有1000的老婆。So he had all in it from all these different countries. 很多老婆是从不同的国家来的。because he's a king, 因为他是王。And it said that gold was so common in his city that silver was worthless. 然后呢，那时候他的城市，他住的国家的地方就是耶路撒冷以色列国家。他说金子是这么多，外面的人有这么多金子的话，那个银子是没有人要的。And so their economy was fantastic. 那时候他们的经济是那么好。And it says in the end, 然后他最后他说 I'm getting ready to die. 然后他说我准备离开这个世界 and it's all worthless. 然后他说都是虚空的。我跟你说了是虚空的。Why? Because he goes, I have everything. He goes, but I can't take any of it with me. 但是他说我什么都有，我要什么都，我想要什么都可以买什么。但是我准备走了，也没办法带走它。So Jesus says the same thing. 然后耶稣的意思也是差不多一样。He goes, don't pursue after all these things in life. If it's just to fill yourself. 然后他说不要追求这么多东西，如果是为了你自己。Because one day you're also going to die. 因为有一天你也要走了。And if it's ultimately for you, then it's going to have no meaning in the end. 然后如果就是为了你自己而已的话，那以后都是虚空的。But Jesus says, but rather change your perspective. Whatever you do here on earth, let it be for God's kingdom. 但是你在这里做什么，应该是为了上帝的国家。Why? Because whatever happens to yourself here, it won't be impacted in heaven. 所以不管你在你这里的遇到什么问题的话，不会影响你的天国的生活。And then Jesus says, 然后耶稣说 For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. 因为你的钱包在哪里，你的心也在哪里。And so ultimately, that is what all of us as Christians, we should always take a moment to think about. 所以我们基督徒应该是有的时候在思考这个问题。What am I doing today? What am I doing, today or this week or this month or this year? 我今天做什么？我这周做什么？我这个月做什么？还是今年做什么？Is it meaningful or is it a waste of time? 是有意思吗？还是虚空的？ And so, like in my life, I've spent a lot of time playing video games. 在我生活中，我花很多时间玩的游戏。I remember I used to play, when I was with my brothers, like especially in high school, and right after high school, we used to play a lot of video games. 我跟我的弟弟们天天玩很多游戏。At one time we had I think 5 Xboxes in my house. 之前我们有很多 Xbox 在我的家里。And every room had one. 然后所有的房间都有 Xbox. 因为我们平常有很多朋友们过来一起玩游戏。And I remember in my room alone, I had 4 computers because me and my 4 brothers would play. 然后呢 or me and 2 of my other brothers would play, and then we'd always have another friend over. 然后呢，我之前也在美国，我的房间有4个电脑， 因为为了我自己还有2个弟弟，还有一个朋友，我们平常每周末一起玩游戏。So we spent a ton of time. 我花了很多时间玩了它。But you know what? In the end, years later, like that really didn't do anything for my life. 但是几年后，这个东西是对我生活没有什么大的进步。You know, and so like Solomon would say, this is vanity. 然后 Solomon 王他会说了就是虚空的。Because it had no ultimate purpose. 因为最后的没有什么大的，没有对你来说没有什么大的进步。And in God's eyes, it's nothing. 然后在上帝的眼睛中是没有那么大的意思。And so Jesus says, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. 因为你的钱，你的财宝在哪里，你的心也在哪里。And that at the end is actually what Solomon says at the end of the book of Ecclesiastes. 所以我们现在学习 Ecclesiastes 这本书，就是传播书而传道书。然后呢 and in the very end, 最后的章 there's 12 chapters, 12章。In the very end, he says, the ultimate thing in life. 他说你生活的所有的人的生活的最重要的东西是什么 ？Is to fear God， 是敬畏耶和华 ，and allow that to lead your life。如果你敬畏他的话，让这个领导你的生活。Because if you fear God， 因为如果你敬畏耶和华的话，上帝就是上帝 ，then everything that you do in life will be in line with it。然后你的生活做什么都会跟他有关系。And Jesus is saying that this is good because whatever you accumulate here in life, one day it's going to either break down or it'll be destroyed by whether it's, weather or Jesus says bugs will come and eat it or someone's going to steal it. 然后呢，耶稣说你在这里，你买什么做什么东西，以后都会坏了，还是虫子会吃掉它，或者别人偷走它等等，或者以后就扔了，对吧？ But everything you do in life, but if it's ultimately for God's glory, then it will be meaningful in the end. 但是如果你的生活，你所有的行为都是为了上帝，那以后都有意思，而且会在天堂有财宝。Philippians chapter 3 verses 7 and 8, 腓立比书第3章7到8节 says, But what things were gained to me? So this is Paul's perspective. 然后就是保罗他的看法。It says, Those I counted lost for Christ. 他说，这是我先前因为与我有益的，我现在因基督都当作有损的。And so Paul's saying that everything I did before was for myself. 然后保罗他说，我之前的生活都是为了我自己。And he says, but now everything I do in life is for Jesus. 但是他说但是我现在我的生活所有的做什么，所有的行为都是为了耶稣。然后他说，这个是有意思的，这些都是虚空的，是这个意思。And that is a good perspective to have. And that's what I try to have. That's what I hope that all of us have. 然后我想就是我也自己的行为，我自己的看法 to have that kind of perspective on life. 有对生活有这样的看法 because none of us want to get to the end of our life and say, everything that I did in life was meaningless. 因为没有人生他们准备做的时候对自己说，我的生活都是虚空的，没有意思。And I think, and all of us, I don't know if anyone's ever read, there's books out there and you can listen to people's deathbed confessions. And some of them are really good. 然后呢我之前也读完了一本书，就是很多人非常有名的人，他们都准备走的时候，他们最后的句话，他们说什么，非常非常有意思。And there's a lot of people that regretted what they did in life. 很多人他们准備做的時候，他們有後悔的。And there was, there's a lot of there's a book called Deathbed Confessions and other ones, and it's a very good, I think, thing that to think about. 然後呢，我有一個 Deathbed Confessions， 就是 Deathbed， 就是你準備死的死床的意思，就是你準備做的時候，然後他們最後的句話說什麼？And some of them are kind of scary. 有一些的是比較，我覺得比較。他們比較害怕的、懼怕的，因為他們都覺得他們的生活沒有什麼意思。 然后我觉得是非常非常可怜的。Verse 3, 第三节 it says, What do people gain from all their labor at which they toil under the sun? 他说，人在日光之下的劳碌所得到的事是什么呢？ And so now he's saying like, look, if everything is vanity in life, then what is the point of everything that we do that's basically whatever we do in life, whether it's work, eat or sleep, what's it all for? 然后他说我们在天天做什么东西，不管是工作、赚钱、我们的爱好等等，都是为了什么？都是为了什么？ He wants us to think. 他想我们思考这个问题。What do people gain from all their labor? So what's the point of you going to work? You're working 40 hours a week, 50 hours a week. Why? What's the point? 然后他说是人在日光的之下的劳碌，说的到底是什么呢？你每周花了这么多时间在上班，是为了什么？你在学习这么多课是为了干嘛？ What's the point? Because there's been billions of people before you that have done the same thing. 因为已经有这么多人已经跟你一样的上一样的课，跟你一样的工作。So why are you doing it? So 为什么你在做了？ And so what he wants us to do is not to attack anyone. 他的意思不是他不想来攻击你。He just wants you to think about what am I doing with my life. 他想你思考你现在的生活，你在干嘛？你在做什么？ And there's nothing wrong with that. Actually, it's very, very good. 他就是非常好的。我们因为没有人想浪费的，没有人想浪费他们的生活、他们的机会等等。Because ultimately, one day we will all be like Solomon. We'll be old. 因为最后的我们跟 Solomon 王一样的，都会变老了。And no one wants to look back on life and say, I wish I did this, I wish I would have done that. 然后没有人想老的时候对自己说，我希望我年轻的做这么东西，还是不要做那个东西。Mark 8:36 says, 马可福音第8章36节说 This is Jesus says, For what shall it profit a man if he shall gain the whole world but lose his own soul? 然后耶稣说了，人就是赚的全世界，就是你在世界上赚了所有的东西，拿所有的东西，买了所有的东西。It shall gain the whole world and lose his own soul. 赔上自己的生命，有什么益处呢？ So Jesus is saying, what's the point if you become the richest person in the world, but you die and go to hell? 但是耶稣的意思是，那如果你成为世界上的最有钱的人，但是以后你不能进入天堂，不能进入上帝的国家，那你的生活有意思吗？ And that's kind of like what Solomon is saying, the same thing. 然后 Solomon 王他的意思也是一样的。You know what's really sad is that Solomon 王他的生活也是比较可怜的。Yeah, he was a child of God. 他是上帝的孩子。But he made a lot of bad mistakes. 但是他做了很多不对的地方。You know, for example, 就比如 he had, let's just take his wives for example. 我们说他的妻子的问题。So his very first wife was from Egypt. 他第一个老婆是从埃及来的。And even later on, even though he ends up having 999 other wives, his first wife was the one that he really, really loved. 然后呢，他第一个老婆是从埃及来的，但是以后他也跟999的老婆也娶了别的美女。但是你知道吗？他最爱的是谁？他第一个老婆。However, because he married so many other women, 但是你知道吗？因为他跟这么多美女结婚的话 later on, a lot of the other women led him astray. He made a lot of bad decisions because they would say, do this or do that. And they would nag him and they would lead him astray. And he made a lot of bad decisions because of that. 然后呢，因为他有这么多老婆的话，这个老婆生那个东西，这个老婆生这个东西，然后呢，很多就是让他跌倒。And so in the end, yeah, he got to heaven, but he made a lot of bad choices getting there. 对了，以后他到了天堂，但是他因为有这么多的老婆的话，让他做了比较多的不对的地方，让上帝生气。And so now he's saying at the end of his life, a lot of what I did was vanity. 然后他说他准备走的时候，就是离开这个世界，他说我做了很多东西是虚空的。And so what he wants us to do, and like his son and his children, is he goes, I want you to think about life. What are your pursuits in life? Don't waste it like I did. 然后他对他的孩子们说了， 我想你思考，你想做什么？你的目的是什么？不要浪费的，不要因为我自己想买什么我就买什么，我想吃了什么就吃了什么，我想去哪里我就去哪里。但是以后也是虚空的。And so he goes, unless 除了 what you're doing is for the glory of God. 除了你做了什么是为了上帝的荣耀。And so that's what he ultimately wants to get at. And so us as Christians, 所以我们基督徒 we also want everything we do in life to have meaning. 我们生活做了什么东西都是有意思的。Like all our goals, 我们的生活的所有的目标 we don't want it to be wasted. 我们不想是浪費的。We don't want it to be vanity, like Solomon say. 我们不想我们的目的是虚空的。Now, there's nothing wrong with, you know, buying like a big house or new clothes. There's nothing wrong with that. But just remember that whatever you buy, it's nice now, but years later, it's not going to have the same type of feeling that you did when you first had it. 就比如果你现在买很大的房子，你可能现在非常非常开心，但是 like 10年后，你对这个房子可能跟第一天的感觉完全不一样的，因为你已经习惯了。然后你可能感觉我挺喜欢的，但是因为你已经住了很多年了的话，对你来说是没有那么大的，你可能没有那么大的跟之前一样的感动。The same was with clothes or whatever. 跟我们买这么多衣服的话一样的。1 Corinthians 15:58, 哥林多前书15章58节 says, Therefore, my beloved children, be ye steadfast, unmovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord. For as much as you know that your labor is not in vain for the Lord. 然后他说，所以我亲爱的弟兄们，你们又要坚固，不可以摇动，常常的竭力，多做了主工，因为知道你们的劳苦在主里面不是的突然的。And so here he wants to encourage all Christians. 所以他现在想鼓励所有的基督徒 that whatever difficulties you encounter in life. 所以不管你的生活遇到什么难处的话。If your heart is after God, 如果你的心是为了上帝 that is not in vain, 也不是虚空的 and it ultimately like will become a blessing later on. 然后最后的结果也要成为你的幸运，你的英雄 your blessing, 你的祝福。哎呀，忘记了说什么。Number 4, 最后的节，最后的经文 says, Generations come and generation goes, but the earth remains forever. 一代过去，一代又来了，的却永远长存，的球永远的长存。So he means like everything comes and goes. This generation of people will come and go. Later on, the next generation of people will come and go. 所以他的意思是，现在这个时代，以后这个时代所有的人会走了，以后有新的时代，但是这个新的时代以后也有走了。It says, but the earth is still here. 但是我们的地球还在。And so basically what he's saying is like, think about it. Because whatever happens later on, people have already done. 所以以后不管谁做什么的话，以前已经有人做过了。So think about your pursuits. 所以你思考你的生活的目的，思考你现在的追求。And is it good or not? Or is it a waste of time? 是好的吗？还是浪费的 or is it vanity 还是虚空的 Let's pray 我们祷告 Heavenly Father, we thank you for tonight 听到我父很感谢今天晚上的聚会 and Lord, I just continue to pray for your blessing upon all the people here and also online 然后主要也祝福这里的来所有的人还有线上的人还有以后的在 YouTube 的人And Lord, help us just that every pursuit in life that we have that would have ultimate meaning and would not be vain in your eyes or our eyes. 然后主啊，希望我们在这里所有的人，还有线上的人，我们的生活的所有的追求，希望都不是虚空的， 在你眼睛中，还是在我们的眼睛中。And if there is anything in our life that we're pursuing after that is meaningless, Lord, then help us to change. 然后，如果我们现在是追求的是，就是没有什么意思，就是浪费的，那帮我们很快发现了改自己的道路。我奉你耶稣基督的名求，阿们。